What's up everybody, Commander Sanctum here, and today we have a brand new deck tech using Arabella Abandoned Doll. Arabella is a 1/3 artifact toy for red-white that has whenever Arabella attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. Honestly, this is kind of a sick ability and can be very abusable if built correctly. Since we're in Boros, the best way to go about this will be with tokens, since we have the two colors that are pretty much the best at making small creature tokens. The bigger an army we can make, the more Arabella will drain from our opponents on attack, letting us basically go big and wide at the same time. With that, let's get to the card highlights. We have quite a few options when it comes to token generation in red and white. To start out with, let's look at some that are consistent sources of generation every turn. Assemble the Legion is one of my personal favorites, as it can generate an absolutely massive number of tokens if it's allowed to stay on the battlefield for a while. Charismatic Conqueror is more variable in its token generation, since your opponents can simply choose to tap their creatures or artifacts as they enter, but honestly, this is still a good thing for us. If all the creatures they play enter tapped, it means they'll likely be wide open for an attack from my Arabella and army of small creatures, easily knocking down their life total significantly. Rabble-rousing will generate us tokens on attack, based on how many creatures we attack with. The best part about this is that you can stack this trigger with Arabella's so that the tokens are generated first, meaning Arabella's drain ability will be that much bigger on resolution. We also have token creation spells that let us pay X amount of mana to generate the equivalent number of tokens. Secure the Wastes and Song of Totentans are two such examples, with Song of Totentans giving the added benefit of giving all your creatures haste, meaning any tokens you generate on that turn, or casting Arabella herself, will immediately allow you to attack with them. Tempt with Vengeance is one of the best ones, as there's a chance that you'll be able to get double or triple the number of tokens if your opponents are sufficiently tempted by it. Admittedly, most opponents likely won't be tempted, as doing so will make them take a ton more damage with Arabella's ability, but you never know. There might be at least one person who will take you up on your offer. It wouldn't be a red-based token deck without some sort of goblin sub-theme. With this, we have two of the best goblin token generators in Krenko Mob Boss and Krenko 10th Street Kingpin. Krenko Mob Boss needs no real explanation as to why he's pretty much the best goblin token generator out there, making him a very efficient include in an Arabella deck, even if it isn't focused on goblins. Likewise, we also have Siege Gang Lieutenant, which will be a nice consistent combat token generator for us that will also feed into Krenko. Next up, we have a few creatures that have more than 2 power and don't actually create tokens, but are crucial in such a deck nonetheless. This is due to the fact that they increase the number of tokens created whenever it happens. Ozhur-Tak Deepest Foundation will triple the number of tokens you create, while Mondrak Glory Dominus doubles them. These are going to be such great effects for Arabella, since we want to get a critical mass of tokens in order to do as much damage as we can with her ability. Ozhur-Tak is especially great since it is so resistant to being destroyed. The flip side, Temple of Civilization, will be very easy to flip back to Ozhur-Tak, since we'll be constantly making creatures that we can attack with. In order to make sure we are able to keep up the pressure on our opponents and continually create tokens, we need to be able to draw cards. Since we're all about creating smaller creatures, we have a few efficient ways to do this. Welcoming Vampire, Tocasia's Welcome, and Caretaker's Talent will all generate cards for us whenever we generate our tokens. Welcoming Vampire will do it for any creature entering with power 2 or less. Tocasia's Welcome cares about mana value 3 or less, which works with tokens since they have no mana value. And Caretaker's Talent cares specifically about tokens. Caretaker's Talent's level 3 ability can also be considered an additional win con. While you won't want to level it up to 3 immediately since it will then turn off Arabella's ability, it can be a good finisher, leveling it up to 3 right before alpha striking your opponents with a large board of tokens. Mentor of the Meek is similar to Welcoming Vampire, but you have to pay 1 mana to draw the card, rather than just getting it for free. However, it has no once per turn stipulation like the Vampire does, meaning you can activate it multiple times if you generate multiple tokens, making it an efficient mana dump if you have nothing else to do and need the cards. Idol of Oblivion is a simple card draw spell that lets you draw whenever you make a token. Since most cards in this deck will be making tokens, this card will almost always be online every turn, meaning it's a nice way to freely draw a card. Removal is another facet of Magic decks that is always important. While most of the time removal is separate from the theme of a deck, there are actually some removal spells that fit well with tokens. Martial Coup and White Sun's Twilight are both token generation spells, but act as board wipes if you pump 7 or more mana into them. Most of the time you'll probably want to use these with the board wipe mode active, but you can always cast it for less if you just need a few more tokens to close out the game. Dusk is an excellent board wipe that will almost never impact us in any way, since we're so focused on smaller creatures due to Arabella's ability. Dawn is also especially good in this deck, since most of the creatures that we'll be casting have power 2 or less, meaning we'll be able to easily get them back to our hand if our opponents end up wrathing the board. While Arabella's ability will likely be the main method of winning with this deck, we do have some good alternative win cons that we can include, in case the Arabella strategy just isn't working out. Akroma's Will can turn all of our simple 1/1s into evasive, life-linking, double-striking attackers that can do some serious damage to our opponents. This spell also can act as a Wrath protection spell, since it gives our creatures indestructible, protecting our massive army while likely destroying all of our opponent's creatures. Throne of the God Pharaoh is an excellent card in any go-wide strategy that may be attacking, since it will drain all of our opponent's life points for each tapped creature we have. Meaning, if we swing all out at one opponent at the end step, the rest of our opponents, plus that original opponent if they're still living, will lose all that life as well. Grafted Exoskeleton may be a bit more of a controversial card, but it can close out the game quickly. Since Arabella herself does the damage with her ability, if we attach Grafted Exoskeleton to her, it means that all the damage from that ability will be infect damage. This effectively makes it so all of our opponents have only 10 life, since a player only needs 10 poison counters to lose the game, meaning we'll need a much smaller board to simply instantly kill all of our opponents. Finally, we have some utility cards that work well with an Arabella token-themed deck. Delney Streetwise Lookout will effectively be like a Panharmonicon for this deck, since most of our creatures will have power 2 or less. This means that Arabella's trigger will double when she attacks, doing a ton more damage. Not only that, but it will also affect things like Welcoming Vampire, allowing us to draw more cards than usual. Roar of Resistance will give most of our army haste, while also allowing us to pump up their damage when we attack with them. Just make sure to activate this after Arabella's trigger resolves, so you don't lose out on any damage from having creatures with too much power. This card is also great because it can be used when an opponent attacks another opponent, making it a very effective political card. Reconnaissance is useful when you want to attack with Arabella to get her trigger, but don't want her to die because your opponents have too large of blockers. Using this to remove Arabella from combat is a great way to both get her trigger to activate and protect her from dying, all at the same time. Strionic Resonator, like Delney Streetwise Lookout, is another great way to double up on a triggered ability, whether it be from Arabella or something else like Welcoming Vampire. Prosperous Partnership is going to be absolutely great in this deck, as it not only creates tokens for us when it enters, it also lets us tap creatures to create treasure tokens. Since we'll be making so many creatures, this card will let us likely generate a ton of treasure that we can use on X spells or other spells that cost a lot to generate a ton more tokens. These new tokens can then, in turn, be used to create more treasure, making us pretty much never have to worry about mana again. Not to mention, this is a great card to pair with Throne of the God Pharaoh, since this will allow us to tap our creatures without needing to attack with them. Here is an example deck list utilizing all the previously mentioned cards. Additional cards include a ton more token generators like Jackrabbit and Call the Coppercoats, ways to get in extra damage to our opponents when we create tokens with Impact Tremors and Raid Bombardment, and more great utility in cards like Wand of the World Soul and Jeska's Will. While Arabella doesn't have a super unique ability, especially in a color combination like Boros, it is a pretty powerful one. Boros is especially great at making a ton of small creatures, which is exactly what Arabella wants to be doing, making it an easy strategy to work with. The amount of pressure that your opponents will be under will be extremely significant. Make no mistake, this is basically an aggro deck, where you're going to be able to constantly be doing a ton of damage to your opponents, both with Arabella and the massive army you'll be making. This deck benefits from almost being a go wide and go tall strategy. The wider you go with your tokens, the more damage Arabella will do when she attacks, making it a very effective combination of two usually opposite strategies. That being said, since it is so creature focused, it will be rather weak to decks with a lot of board wipes or other kinds of creature control. However, certain common creature control strategies like Ghostly Prison or Propaganda will be less effective. While Arabella and her army may not be able to attack a player, Arabella's ability will still drain that player's life total, making these types of cards less effective. Arabella also suffers from being a small creature herself and needing to attack to get her trigger. If our opponents have any even medium-sized creatures, they'll likely be able to kill Arabella, forcing us to recast her with an ever-increasing commander tax. We can offset this with cards like Maze of Ith or Reconnaissance, but those cards can only get us so far. There may be games where everyone is playing creature-heavy decks, and you'll need to be more strategic about when you attack with her and when you hold her back, based on your board presence and how much damage you'll do. Even with all this said, however, Arabella is certainly a powerful commander, and I can pretty much guarantee you that there will be games you play with her where you'll end it before your opponents even have a chance to get remotely set up. If that sounds of interest to you, I'd highly recommend checking out Arabella as a commander. I hope you enjoyed watching this deck tech on Arabella Abandoned Doll. The full deck list outlined in this video can be found at the Architect link at the top of the description. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like and comment, as well as subscribe to the channel for more Magic content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.